So welcome to Conversationally, Thriving with Lymphedema, Thriver series. And Bisa Dobson and myself, Deborah Penyuk, are here with a recent Thriver that we just featured in our Thriver series on Instagram. He is also a Learn Celebrity Ambassador and a former Bachelorette contestant, Cameron Ayala.
Hey, how's it going? Good to talk to you again, Dee.
Yeah.
Good to meet you, Bisa, officially.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, we are. I think we're all suffering from the heat and, COVID overexposure, just being compliant with everything that we need to do since we are all Thrivers. And, we wanted to dig into a few questions and see where everybody's at, and especially you, Cam. So we'll hand it over to Bisa. She's got a good question to start us off with.
Yes, I do. Okay, my first question for you is that being a celebrity ambassador for Learn, you must meet a ton of people in our community from all walks of life, and I'm sure they talk to you about what's going on in their life. So I'm wondering, what are the most common issues or concerns that the people you meet report to you regarding their lymphedema, self-management, or management in general?
Excellent. That's a good, thick question. a lot of facets there. So I think one of the things that has been the most enjoyable part about being an ambassador with Learn, and ultimately, which was kind of the segue into my career now as a compression therapy consultant for a company called Lymphopress that makes compression pumps, it's that I've gotten to meet so many different lymphedema and lipedema patients that range from age 2 to 92. I mean, it's really that vast with hereditary and secondary lymphedema patients. So as both of you ladies know, it's not a one size fits all condition. And yeah, we share similar symptoms from time to time, but I think the biggest opportunity for improvement is really not even just the awareness, because that's like a larger thing at play, but I would say a more holistic education and protocol for patients that it's just not readily available, across the United States. And I'm not sure exactly how it is in Canada or really in other countries, but just living here in Houston, Texas, which is a pretty large city, I see so many different bits of advice and treatment protocol prescribed to patients that differs from lymphedema therapist to lymphedema therapist. So there really isn't this consistency across the board, but I think that also kind of speaks to the complexity of lymphedema and lipedema. So does that answer your most of the questions?
I think so.
So being a relatively young man, what do you think your friend circle knows about lymphedema? And have you been the educator in your peer group? And how supportive have they been through your most stressful times?
That's actually evolved quite a bit over time, because I remember when I was originally diagnosed with lymphedema when I was 11 years old, and I was always a multi-sport athlete. Even after my original diagnosis, I managed to, wear my compression garments when I played. And I was fortunate in the sense that my lymphedema, even still to this day, the swelling is pretty much isolated to the knee and above. So it's not truly my entire right leg, because I know a lot of patients with lower extremity lymphedema, unilaterally or bilaterally, when it impacts the calf, the ankle, the feet, the toes, that's when the mobility can become extra challenging. And that's when just, aesthetically and visually to a person, it becomes more obvious. But when you have most of the swelling concentrated kind of the knee and above, it's not as noticeable. But I was always wearing my black compression stocking. So that stood out quite a bit when I was playing basketball, for example, because in the early 2000s, compression wasn't something that was commonplace in athletics, right? Because for me, it was medical, right? I didn't just wear an Under Armour compression sleeve because it's kind of a cool thing now, and you see every athlete under the sun, and I'd say most sports wearing some form of compression, which is good, we know, for circulation. But at the time in the early 2000s, when no one else was doing that, and it was just me wearing my medical grade 30-40 compression garment, people
Mm-hmm.
thought it was pantyhose, and I would actually get taunted quite a bit by the opposing team and their fans playing basketball, for example. So that was one of those things I kind of made it part of my identity. But I wasn't really talking about lymphedema because honestly, that young, I didn't know a lot of the clinical elements to it. I was just basically, I have a swollen leg and I got to compress it. That's kind of fundamentally all I would say to people, because it wasn't until I was 22 years old, after college, that I had my first bout of cellulitis and infection. So that's when the more severe part of having lymphedema really started to take control of my life. And at that point, I actually lost a couple of close friends because they didn't really know how to handle a friend who had a chronic disease or a sickness where, hey, I can't go to a concert with you guys or a festival because my leg can't handle standing that long period of time, or I'm going to have to miss this spring break trip or this summer trip because I'm recovering in a hospital, or I'm still trying to get my mobility back. So a lot of friends kind of tapered out because they just didn't know how to lend support. And it's almost like the friendship initially was just out of convenience, or I was the life of the party, or they could benefit from me in some capacity. But I really have taken the role of trying to educate my friends as much as possible. But really, I've also, a lot of close people in my family and community have had breast cancer. So that's a whole nother application of lymphedema that we see is more and more common, or at least more talked about. So I find no more fulfillment than when a neighbor or just someone in my family or whoever thinks of me as the thought leader amongst their close circle to find answers, to give them the best type of treatment, and really some encouragement to persevere through it. So that's kind of how, as I've gotten older, it's become even more part of my identity because I'm open about it, and it's my professional career now. So it really is all encompassing. I don't go a single day without talking about lymphedema, whereas before it would be reactionary either to an injury, a surgery, or someone who just said, why are you wearing that stocking?
Right.
You seem to be in a really good place as far as your lymphedema right now. You're out about it. It's part of your career. You're doing all this advocacy work. So it's a really big piece of your life in a really great way. And you just mentioned in answering the last question that as a young man, it was hard because people taunted you and then you lost friends. So if you were able to go back in time to the 11-year-old boy or the teenager and give them advice about thriving with lymphedema, what life would look like now, what would you say to him?
I would say to younger me, if I knew then what I know now, I would say be more compliant with the compression even when it's hot outside, because I think that was really my triggering point when I was 22 that led to my first bout of cellulitis. Though my leg wasn't super swollen because I worked out a lot, so I was naturally moving lymph, but I know that if I would have worn my compression consistently from the point of diagnosis at age 11 all the way up until where I'm at now, that I probably could have avoided a couple of those bouts of infection and definitely would have been less fibrotic material there. So that's kind of more of a clinical side. But the other, like the psychological and emotional side of it all, is I would just tell myself that, you know what, this is actually a great filter to find out who your true friends are and who the people in your life who actually love you for who you are, flaws and all. And when you take a flaw and you embrace it, that's kind of this whole notion of turning a tragedy into triumph. Because the blessing of having lymphedema at a very young age is it did instill a sense of appreciation and a work ethic, not just in sports, because I had to work extra hard just to keep at the average competition level. But when you're an 11-year-old and you're in a hospital recovering from surgery and you see other patients with other sicknesses and illnesses that have it way worse off than you do, you really do appreciate what your normal is.
Right.
Awesome.
So in all of the events that you've participated in the last year or so, one that touched me that you've participated in was CampWatchme.
Yes. Yeah. Betty just texted me like 10 minutes ago. That's a small world. And it was supposed to be happening right now. The second one.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be in Winter Park, Colorado, but unfortunately COVID hit. So yeah.
Well, I saw that they're going to be doing 2 weeks now.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So
Mm-hmm.
what did it mean for you to be involved with that and all those amazing children and their parents?
So I think of really two kind of circle of life moments, if you will, is when we got there. So that was the first time I got to meet Cora. And at the time she was 2 years old. And if you're a part of the lymphedema community on Instagram, you've probably heard of the little Lymphy. And her mom, Casey, is her caretaker. Basically already a lymphedema therapist with as much research as she's done for her daughter's case, and going even to the Foldy Clinic in Germany. I just think of how much of a thriver not only Cora is as a 2-year-old being born with this condition, but her mom to provide that discipline and already teaching Cora about compliance. And seeing that, it just really touched my heart, because I had a whole new appreciation for how disciplined my parents were, making sure I was going to the top specialists in Houston, making sure I was seeing the best garment manufacturers out there to give me a normal life. And it was really moving to see that. And another part that was kind of full circle to me is there was another little boy there. He was about 8 or 9 years old, so even younger than I was when I was originally diagnosed. And he was kind of shy, as most kids are at that age, especially when you're at a camp with all girls, because he was the only boy patient, or camper rather. And so I wanted to make him feel extra comfortable and kind of be a role model of managing the condition. And the older you get, you don't have to have elephantitis or the severe cases of lymphedema. And even more so, I got to go to his home a couple months after camp and do his delivery for his pneumatic compression device that I represent, the company I represent. So seeing that all come full circle, it was just a very touching moment. And I'm very excited to have a lifelong partnership with Brittany Williams and with Betty Westbrook at CampWatchme and Bryland's Feet.
Yeah, that's great. I know it can probably be very daunting for when you're the only boy.
When he gets older, he'll appreciate that. I think you and I have joked before, Dee, that it's like,
yes.
At conferences, I don't mind because I'm like one of the only guys there, the Lymphedema Bachelor.
There you go. There's a new title to add to your repertoire.
So you just kind of spoke about this and speaking about that young man. So we don't often see men who have chronic illnesses speaking online or even hearing them speak about their illness. And I want to ask you why you think that is, and also what we, the rest of us in the lymphedema community, the women, can do to help support them. And in fact, any woman who's connected to a man who has a chronic illness, what are things we can do to support them in this walk? Because again, it's not spoken about much.
So I don't know too much about the Canadian culture, so I'll just speak from the perspective of an American man. In the American society, it is often thought that a man who expresses any pain or discomfort or seeks the assistance of others is weak, right? We tend to bottle up our emotions. We tend to mask pain. And so I think just in general, and again, this is a sweeping generalization, this is not all American man, but I'm just talking in generalities, is that we think we can beat something just by pushing it under the rug, or we don't believe everything that the doctors tell us, or we think it's not manly if we have someone help us out with, especially things with our health. So for me growing up, before I was an advocate, my whole thing is I didn't want my teammates in any sport I was playing or the coaches in any sports I was playing to give me special treatment. I didn't want them to make alterations to certain plays that we would do in football, baseball, basketball, etc. I didn't want the opposing team to let me score because they're like, oh, this kid has a disability, right? So I actually would downplay my lymphedema quite a bit because I didn't want people to think that I was weak. So the older that I've gotten, I've realized, and I talked about this kind of earlier, like I love music and love going to live shows and concerts. But I know that if I stagnantly stand at a concert for 30 minutes plus to an hour, even if I'm wearing my compression garment, my leg is going to balloon. It's going to be uncomfortable and I'm going to be in pain. Now, I'm okay with asking for ADA accommodations, which is the American Disability Act. So if that will get me a special seat or a bar stool or something to where I'm not going to be in pain and misery, and something that should be bringing me pleasure and fun. The question is, how do we change that at large? You know, I think it's just going to take the advocacy and men coming forward with it. Yes, there is power in this whole notion of celebrity. I do not consider myself a celebrity. Yes, I was part of a popular show that has a lot of, I guess, distribution, if you will, but I'm not an actor. I'm not a model. I'm not a professional athlete. I don't do the things that I guess would get celebrity status, but anything that I can do to try to bring awareness to it. And I've had several lymphedema male patients reach out to me directly on social media and ask me, like, you know, how do you date with lymphedema? You know, what happens when you have genital edema? Because that's pretty common when you're lower extremity. Your anatomy can swell down there, and not like a good way. We kind of joke about it. It's like, well, you know, at least it swells, you know, but you got to have a little levity to it. But also, I know a lot of patients aren't as extroverted as I am. And I tell them, I said, look, just because I'm screaming from the rooftops and from the mountain peaks, you know, I have lymphedema, Google it, and trying to be part of this movement, other people can still be advocates. They can still educate themselves and still empower themselves by just engaging and consuming content like what you ladies are doing, other lymphedema podcasts, support groups, and I think just as much for their spouses, girlfriends, siblings, coworkers, colleagues, friends, anybody who's you know, in the life of a man with lymphedema. Let them know that it doesn't make them weak because they have a chronic condition they have no control over. And you know, knowing that, hey, you know, we may have to make a few extra stops if we're going on a hike to let, you know, Joe Smith rest his legs a little bit. So it's something I wish I had a silver bullet for, but unfortunately I don't. It's just going to be, you know, baby steps, just like when you're recovering from any type of major surgery or dealing with lymphedema. You do have to take baby steps. It's not a full-on sprint, unfortunately.